afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, yes. Excellent. Thanks for turning out this afternoon to this event that's being laid on by the alumni team on our behalf. Thank you to them, and we'll be having a few words from the alumni team at the end of the session. So just a little bit of housekeeping first of all. This session is going to be recorded, so that by attending really you are agreeing to that recording process happening and to your responses being recorded for posterity. For those of you that don't know me, and I think there probably aren't many people here that don't know me in the audience. Anybody not know me? So I'm Chris Biggs. I'm the lead for the Pharmacology and Physiology course, as you know. I'm joined by a wonderful panel of ex-Pharmacology and Physiology students, actually, today. The panel will introduce themselves in due course. And what we're going to do then is we're going to ask each one of them to really describe their journey. So essentially that journey from their time with us here at Westminster all the way to what they're currently involved in as a career. And that's going to take up, I would imagine, a fair bit of the session. And then obviously at the end we're going to open up to Q&A. And that Q&A will then potentially spill over into a networking event afterwards as well. Okay, there will be some refreshments. Alex, our alumnus team representative, will be having a few words with you at the end of the formal part of the session as well. Okay, so without further ado, let's get the panel to introduce themselves. So, starting on my left over here at the end.
Hiya, my name's Camille. I graduated in 2017. I then went on and did my Masters at King's College in Drug Design and Development, where I also undertook a 6-month project at GSK as well. So after that I then went and worked at GSK for about 6 months working in the in vivo department, and then I moved on and started doing my PhD in neuroscience at UCL. I graduated last year, and now I'm doing my postdoctoral research fellowship at UCL in the same lab, kind of continuing on the work that I was doing there. Yeah, that's just a quick overview.
Thank you.
My name is Melissa McCoy. I graduated in 2018. I then later went on to study cancer biology at UCL. And then I started at the UK Biocentre, which is an organisation which was the largest COVID lab doing PCR tests. We did 31 million PCR samples. I started off as a lab technician, and I currently work in the field of lab automation. So it's essentially coding the robots in the lab and automating manual processes such as pipetting. The main sort of processes we do in our lab is RNA and DNA extraction, and now I work as a senior application scientist. So I manage and troubleshoot and calibrate all the equipment in the lab, and I work with a team of application scientists who validate and verify the processes in the lab, and then I also code the robots in the lab. So it's more so the field of technology now, and kind of integrating science into technology.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jake James. I graduated in 2019. I went on to do a Masters in Drug Discovery and Pharma Management at UCL. After graduating from there, I think I had a pretty good grasp that I wanted to go into life sciences consulting. I took the route of market access, so to anybody that isn't sure what market access is, I'll try and do it in a minute or two. Essentially, it would be the idea of a manufacturer having a drug approved but not yet having reimbursed patient access to that drug. So if you were to come to an agency that deals in market access, we would essentially value test your drug with some stakeholders like doctors and payers from the UK or Europe, and essentially the overall aim is to facilitate reimbursed patient access to that drug.
So what I'm going to do is ask the panel really a series of questions.
Sorry if I steal your answer here, but we were talking about this before the panel. After I went on to UCL, I think I realised the benefits of being at Westminster. So I think it's everything I have to say would be purely retrospective. That at Westminster, the contact time and the help that you can find is significantly higher than what I felt like I had when I went to UCL. I think it's probably quite a boring topic, but prudent to add that COVID obviously didn't help with that situation, being away from the lecturers. But I think for me, smaller classes here and an increased contact time definitely helped me to feel like I was getting the most out of my time here. So I guess don't take it for granted, I suppose.
I'd say I enjoyed my experience at Westminster. I'd say I made the most of, I'd recommend just networking and meeting other people, doing different courses around you. And because when I studied, I didn't really know where I was going, and I would consider myself as a chameleon, so I was just trying to find out as much information about lots of different projects. I felt like the lecturers here were really supportive, so I think it's always important to sort of ask questions, and they really did encourage me to sort of do outside research other than the research that was linked directly to my course. At the University of Westminster, I was also lucky enough to have the opportunity to travel, so I went to Ghana to work at the hospital there for 2 months, which was an amazing experience, and I wouldn't have been able to have that experience if I didn't talk to my lecturers and engage with them with the sort of different opportunities that could be available to me. And I also didn't maybe pay attention to how useful doing the different projects would be, because usually I think when it comes to the working world, often you need experience to, they always say you need the experience to do certain things or to work in a certain area. But those key skills that you gain from carrying out some of the lab processes during university, you can use those principles as sort of support to sort of justify why you'd be an attractive candidate for wherever you may end up.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I agree with the kind of, once you leave Westminster, that's when you realize how much more contact hours you have at Westminster compared to, I've been to King's College and UCL now, and it's a very big difference. When you go to these sort of, bigger universities, all of a sudden you realize you're kind of on your own, whereas here you do really have that personal touch of being able to speak to your lecturers and get that information that you need. I think as well, what I found at Westminster compared to maybe some of my friends who went to different universities is actually those lab hours. And on the one hand, it might mean that it makes you realize this isn't for you. On the other hand, like me, if you decide that actually you really enjoy the practical aspect, it just means that you go into that sort of like master's applications with so much experience, and it makes your application so much stronger having those skills already and having proof that you know what you're doing and you've had guidance and experience in all these different processes and techniques. And I think that is something that's so valuable in terms of whether you do or don't want to end up doing it. Having that experience is essential.
Thank you, thanks. I think it's probably fair to caveat these excellent contributions with the notion that, of course, you're going to be a postgraduate student. So if you are thinking of moving into a master's program, for example, I guess the expectation is that you are likely to be more autonomous in any case. I think what the panel's kind of implying here is that the particular institutions you attended, you didn't necessarily get all the support that you particularly wanted or felt that you needed. But to some extent, you would expect perhaps them to be a little less hands-on, given that you're postgraduate.
So my master's year was across the period of when the pandemic first started, and we had our sort of lecture time completely suspended, everything transitioned online. When I graduated, it was very much everybody's still staying at home kind of environment. I think the key thought in my mind, whether it was true or not, was the feeling that potentially there were less jobs available because people were less likely to hire if there's uncertainty in any hiring decisions that they make. So navigating that was quite challenging. I think I've deliberately left off some sort of work experience that I had there, where after I completed my master's thesis, I went on to work in a consultancy company that dealt in the medicinal cannabis market. I've left that off purely because I think it definitely isn't what I wanted to do, and I knew that, and I had taken the job purely because it gave me an opportunity to have a job over the COVID pandemic, get some experience, and then eventually end up where I wanted to be. But I think there's still things to learn from that, in the sense that you are able to go away, and you're not necessarily expected to hop straight into what you want to do, if you even know what you want to do at this moment, because I think when I was sat in your shoes, I probably didn't.
So I guess I kind of missed out on the studying through COVID thing, because it was just, COVID happened just after I finished my master's at UCL. So, but what I would say is, I actually, I mentioned I started as a lab technician in a COVID lab. So the experiences I had gained from my master's degree kind of helped to navigate the path that I would go into next. So I would say it's important to sort of keep your options open, because I guess for me, the whole COVID situation gave an opportunity for maybe people that didn't have as much experience to get into the lab, so sort of put their foot in the door at that time.
I'm not sure how much I can add. I was halfway through my PhD when COVID happened. So obviously I wasn't applying for things. I was bang in the middle of something. But obviously it was still a very difficult time. All the labs shut down, so obviously all my research got put on hold, which was incredibly stressful. And then even when we did come back, it was very limited, so there was only a few days a week that I could go in, certain times that I could go in, so it meant that a lot of the research that I was doing, especially the long-term type of research, had to be stopped. And I guess one of the main things that I learned was to be adaptable, to kind of go, okay, I can't do this, but what can I do? How can I adapt to the situation? How can I kind of turn my research around to be able to do something, to get something out of this? And I think that kind of having that resilience and adaptability is just very important to have, in terms of, being in a job and things changing, or whether you're applying for a job and maybe things aren't working out the way that you hope they would. Having that adaptability to say, okay, this isn't quite what I want to do yet, but maybe I'll get some skills from this that'll mean that I'll be able to go on to my next job that is what I want to do. Always kind of take the most out of every opportunity that you have, because you never know. You can always utilize it on your CV and make it into a way that is relevant for the next position you're applying for. Obviously in academia, very technical skill based. So when applying for a PhD, so I picked a PhD that already had a project and had funding. So it was more just aligning my skill set to the research project. So obviously that's CV, cover letter, and then I had an interview in the lab, got to meet the lab members. So specifically for, I think, master's PhDs, it's very technical skill based, what can you bring to the lab in terms of your technical skills. So when you're looking at doing that, or if you're looking at doing a PhD and you want to do a master's in between, look at having a very lab-heavy based master's so you can get those practical skills that you need to be able to apply for a PhD, because you are expected to hit the ground running. No one is going to be teaching you the really basic of things. They want you to have some sort of basic skills that you can take and adapt and use. So having a master's that's very strong on practical skills will help you a lot.
I'd say, in my field it was probably just having good sort of lab practice. At UCL, I worked with sort of colorectal cancer cell lines, and we were sort of treating those cancer cells with sort of chemotherapy and looking at the impact of sort of DNA damage on it. And working in that lab, I used those skills to sort of sell myself in a way to working in the COVID lab, even though it was a little bit different because I guess working in research, you don't want to contaminate the cell culture, whereas it was the opposite with COVID. You didn't want sort of the reverse to happen to you. But some of the tests they had was just, can you use a pet? Are you passionate about sort of the role and helping and what you want to go into? I'd say now as a hiring manager, because I have a team of application scientists, they do have a field of sort of, there's sort of two parts to it. There's a sort of a technical skill, so that's sort of troubleshooting the instruments in the lab. So for example, just handling breakdowns if a centrifuge breaks or something like that. Sort of the first line, doing the first line of it, just trying to figure out what's wrong. And then I guess there's the sort of validation side where you are sort of looking into does this process work for what I want it to work on? And it's not necessarily important to go to have the skills or to be able to code in order to go into that field, because often a lot of sort of the jobs that you go into, and I sit next to sort of data scientists who sort of analyze the results we have. They teach you a lot of the skills as well we have. It's just you need to show that you're sort of passionate and motivated, and then a lot of the sort of other skills that you maybe they're not so fresh in your memory. They kind of refresh you on them. So yeah, that's it.
Okay. Specifically, Melissa, your role, how was the application and interview process? What kind of stages did you have to go through in order to win that job?
I would say it's just sort of that having that interest, really.
Mm-hmm.
Working sort of in a COVID lab, I always used to sort of be fascinated at these robots that were able to sort of pipette, and we work with a lot of blood samples, so we spin the blood samples down and this robot's able to kind of pipette either the buffy coat or the plasma or the whole blood, and then the end goal is sending it off for genotyping or to support other research processes. But I mean, I think the main thing that we look for is that sort of you're passionate and people who are able to just kind of put themselves out there and sort of have that sort of critical thinking aspect.
Okay, thank you.
I think the application process for a consultancy role is probably quite well versed. So if you know consultancy, then you know the kind of pathway that will follow. I can break it down a little bit, but I think cross agencies or even cross different consultant styles, the interview process is probably going to be quite similar. So you have a preliminary introduction of yourself. I think having done some of these interviews for recent interns that were potentially looking at hiring, I think you could probably sum the questions that you're going to get asked into three sorts of categories. It's going to be a review of your CV and why you think you're suited to the role, a review of why you're applying for what you're applying for, and why specifically the company that you've chosen, and then a little bit about your temperament, your ability to work well under pressure, recall some sort of scenarios around any times where you've achieved something that was against the odds, off the cards, that kind of thing. It is quite typical of that kind of interview. Usually they're a two-stage process, maybe three. So with the second stage, you usually have a task to complete. So for us specifically, it was a review of the orphan drug market in Germany. You're expected to then go away and do some research on that, come back and sort of present your findings in a sort of consultative way, right? Yeah, I think I can, if anybody's actually interested in more about that afterwards, I can elaborate on that a bit further. I think for what I like, I would say the biggest thing is exposure to different therapy areas, different project methodologies, and the chance to make sort of a real difference to patients. So if you work with potentially like a more boutique pharmaceutical company, you can really see the work that you do reflected in regulatory submissions that they make, differences that they've made in their clinical trial design if you've recommended that. So I think there's a lot of application to work across multiple projects at the same time and have impact on multiple methodologies of getting a drug to market and then after receiving the patient reimbursement. I think what I don't like, I would go with the political nature of some pharmaceutical companies. Sometimes it can be very difficult when you have, say for example, the head of pricing has commissioned the research, but he needs buy-in from local level teams, so Spain maybe want to get on the line and say, actually, we don't agree with the way you want to do this project. And sometimes you can feel like you're a little bit of a middleman where you kind of have to please both people because you're working for the client as a whole, but ultimately you have been commissioned by one member of that company, and you have to sort of do as well as you can to sort of make everyone kiss and make up, I suppose.
Okay, what I do like is probably working in a fast-paced environment and being able to support some amazing projects. I'd say potentially what I don't enjoy so much is, I guess, the people who work for me, they work in the field of application, so they get more hands-on in terms of sort of coding the robots in the lab. And I guess now, as my role had changed, I don't spend as much time in the lab anymore. I'm more so sort of writing the standard operating procedures and focusing more on quality, which tends to be a little bit more reading, and it tends to be a little bit more sort of serious to make sure that our lab is working in line with sort of the gold standard accreditation that we have. So I guess the good thing is there is a lot of diversity working in sort of applications role. So if coding is the thing for you, then you can go into coding, and they always say sort of technology is the future. But then also if you're quite interested in the sort of hands-on approach and really trying to understand the science behind things, you can sort of adapt that sort of passion to it as well. So it's really diverse, and you can work across a variety of different fields, and you meet a lot of the sort of field service engineers who also maintain the equipment, so you can learn from them as well, and then you also work a lot with the sort of the data scientists and other people such as sales. So I'd say with the applications role, you engage with a lot of different people in science, people who did jobs that you didn't even know existed, which is pretty cool.
So things that I love about being in academia, being sort of in a research lab, is the independence. During a PhD, and especially when you're doing a postdoc, you kind of get to figure out what you're doing for your own research. Obviously, you check in with your supervisors every now and again, but day-to-day running, developing your experiments, looking at your data, and then deciding the next steps. You tend to do that on your own, which is quite exciting, especially when you get to the point of where you really get into your research. It's quite fun going through making all those decisions and seeing things work out. And then also being at the forefront of research is really exciting. At the moment, my lab is writing up proposals for clinical trials. So kind of over the last 4 years, seeing it come from in vivo research and now looking forward into going into clinical trials is a very exciting. It's a very exciting time. I think as well, compared to working maybe in a pharma company where you are doing a very small task in a really big research, you sometimes kind of get lost in the project. You feel like you're not having that big of an impact overall, whereas in a smaller lab, obviously you see the work that you're doing and you see the progress that's happening due to your work, so that's quite nice. I guess the only thing that I kind of see as a downside is because you do work so independently, it can sometimes be a little bit lonely. Because you tend to just kind of get on with your own work and, you know, plug in your headphones and off you go. So you don't really get a lot of meetings or times sort of like in a big group to do stuff together. So it can be a little lonely at times.
I think I was actually genuinely thinking about this yesterday, and I promised myself that I wasn't going to say it because it sounds ridiculous, but I am going to say it. It's completely ironic. I'm sitting here giving advice, and my ultimate piece of advice is be careful on who you listen to for advice. I think everybody in here, maybe you don't know exactly what you want to do after you finish, but you've got the best. You're the best person to look at in terms of thinking, starting that ball rolling. Nobody can tell you what you want to do. Nobody knows you as well as you know you. And if somebody's recommending a job to you or pushing you down a certain line, I would consider maybe why they're doing that, if they're gaining anything from doing that. And just make sure you weigh up all your options, think about, try and get a deep understanding of what you're applying to, and if that truly is where you think you would fit in.
I'd say it's probably most important to sort of ask questions, and sometimes you can sort of find opportunities for yourself by just emailing and reaching out to sort of maybe organisations or people who maybe you connect with on LinkedIn that you may find sort of interesting. I think it's just sort of the networking aspect is the most important. And maybe sort of the work experience. Sometimes you may, it won't harm to maybe send an email to maybe an organisation that you're interested in, to maybe spend a week or 2 weeks there trying to sort of like understand what it is that they're doing as well. So I would say just networking, asking questions, and sort of looking into all the possible routes.
I think one of my biggest sort of takeaways from, I guess, speaking to my friends, speaking to a lot of students, is even people who think they know what they want to do, you don't know until you try it. So it's all trial and error, and sometimes it'll work out, sometimes it won't work out, and just don't feel sort of overwhelmed if it's not what you envisaged it being. Don't feel like you're trapped in pursuing a certain route if you're not actually enjoying it. You can always change, you can always do something different. Like, you're not absolutely trapped in, you know, following a certain route. Even if you say do a master's because you really think you want to go into a certain field, and then after the master's you think to yourself, actually, this really isn't for me, that's okay. You've still got a lot of skills that you've taken away from that experience, and that's the main thing. It's all going to be trial and error, and with every experience, it's going to be one step closer to figuring out what exactly you do want to do. Always kind of think to yourself, what did I like, what did I not like? In my next job, what would I like to do? You know, always kind of like transfer those bits that you like and maybe go like, oh, try a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's all very trial and error, but don't feel disheartened that you're not figuring things out immediately, because nobody does it immediately. You know, everyone's just kind of trying things out until they find the right fit, because it's hard to know what you're going to enjoy unless you tried it.
I didn't move to London as part of my degree. I stayed at home. Well, I mean, home is just outside of London, but I think if I could do that again, I would probably move into some halls, sort of try as much as possible to stay in contact with people, because I've got to be honest, I probably speak to 2 people that I went to Westminster with. One of them semi-frequently and one of them frequently. So I do think there is a real opportunity to gain a lifelong friend or friends from being at university, and if I could do it again, I would probably put more effort into maintaining them relationships.
Thanks, Jack.
I think I would have done more sort of extracurricular events. Obviously, it's really easy to just go to your lectures and, you know, be like, job done. But I think you gain a lot of value from doing a little bit extra things. You know, a bit of volunteering, maybe in a lab, a bit of sort of unpaid work where you can get those experiences that will help you either decide what you want to do next, or it will give you that extra bit of boost on your CV when you're applying for the next thing. And whether it's lab-based or it's charity work or whatever it might be, and I think universities have a lot of resources that are actually underused. So I think really go for those resources, and maybe you'll have a look at them and be like, actually none of this is for me, but have a look at what's out there and then see maybe some of this would actually be quite useful for future applications, or for my own development, or for maybe just for me to get a better idea of what I want to go into. So yeah, I wish I would have used more of those resources.
Yeah, I probably agree with you on that one. I'd say, yeah, the University of Westminster has amazing sort of resources and also opportunities that you maybe didn't know existed. At the time, I think we had the opportunity to go to Gambia and some other places to travel to kind of gain that sort of extra experience, and I'd say the student union and sort of other organisations, they had those opportunities there, but not so many people applied for them at the time. So I guess it's sort of just using the resources that the university has, attending the different talks, and just trying to really make the most of everything that the uni has to offer, really.
Graduating from a bachelor's is where you are, it's not phrased very well, but most vulnerable to making, not mistakes, because you can always learn from things, but not going down the path that maybe you want to. I think if I look back at my time at college, it was very obvious that I would go to uni. If I look back at uni, it was very obvious I would go to a master's, luckily. However, I think now, after you leave here, you might feel a little bit like lost. So I think really, I would really think about what you want to do before you leave here, not after.
Okay.
My biggest advice is be persistent and don't be discouraged by rejections. I think one of the biggest shocks to me after leaving university was, you know, getting rejected from jobs that I applied for, getting rejected from PhDs that I wanted to do. And at the beginning, it's really tough dealing with those rejections, but that's just a really normal part of finding the right fit of a job as well, because a lot of the time, the reason why you were rejected is because you were never going to be a right fit anyway. So actually, don't worry about it, you know, like just go on to the next opportunity, the next application, see what you could have learned from your last application, whether it's to improve your CV, whether it's to improve your interview skills, whatever it is. Don't see rejection as a negative, just use it as a building block for the next opportunity.
I would say use the things that you're passionate about and the things that you love as a means to guide you to your path. I'd say you don't have to always do things the sort of gold standard way of doing it. There is not a one route or policy to get to a certain pathway. You know, I agree with what everyone is saying in terms of, you know, really, if you're interested in say maybe you're interested in a specific position, have a look at the qualities needed to get that role, and maybe start off with just trying to build on one of them. It's really sort of kind of like a stepping stone where we're continuously sort of learning about ourselves and sort of challenging ourselves to be the best version. So I think just keep your mind open and just kind of follow your passions, because your passions, I guess, will in the end direct you into the sort of right location. And also the I guess the course itself is so diverse. There is so many different routes that you can take with this course. Just, I guess, sitting here, we're all in sort of different industries, but we all started off kind of in the same place, not really knowing where it was we were going. So I guess that kind of shows you. And we're still learning as well. I'd say I'm still learning. I'm still not too sure where I'm going to go next, but that's okay. You know, I think it's just do what you love and then let everything else flow off.
Doing as many interviews as possible, even if you're not successful, is the best way to learn the structure of an interview. For me specifically, I remember we had a careers day during our masters where a lot of the companies that typically hire from UCL directly would come and advertise their roles that they have available. I would engage with that process completely, apply to them, try and get interviews, because it's the best. I mean, particularly for what I was doing, getting a case study come to you and figuring out how to go about solving the problem in the case study is something that you can only get through practice. You're not going to receive one case study in one application and just completely ace it first time. There is a sort of a learning process you need to go through. So I basically, after I left, ended up applying to every single market access opportunity that was available. Obviously, you never hear back from 70% of them. 20% of them have the decency to say no, thank you. And then the 10% you get an opportunity with, you've got to try and take that as best as you can.
I would say maybe start off by building a good LinkedIn profile, because that's how sort of the job that I'm working in discovered me. At the time I didn't have so much to put on there. I had the odd volunteering here or there, and then I also decided to break down the modules that I did in my course. So the individual modules and then the individual skills I had learnt from each module, which kind of made it more relevant to employers to really understand what I had learnt or what skills I had gained from each of sort of carrying out each of those tasks. I would also say perhaps, don't be too let down when you sort of receive an email, or if you receive an email of rejection. I think initially it hurts a little bit, but then over time you kind of learn what it is, what it is maybe you could change in the future. And I think sometimes it's not just generally applying without actually taking some time to kind of figure out what you're applying for and putting in the effort. I think when it comes to when people submit CVs and applications, I think that a certain element of personalization is actually really nice to for example, in a cover letter, just making yourself sort of stand out as a candidate, and maybe adding some sort of interesting maybe tasks you carried out, and how that also links to the job that you're applying for, really kind of makes you look different to to, I guess, other people in your course who also did something similar to you. So.
Yeah, I think having an open mind is really important. I think sometimes maybe that dream job of yours is not even something you've ever even thought about. You know, you might not even know that job exists until you have that open mind and look at everything in the sort of general field. But I also think applying for jobs that you're not even interested in is not worth it either. You know, you can't. I don't think it's advisable to just blanket apply using the same CV to 40 jobs. I think because you're just going to get rejections, and that's going to make you feel worse about your application processes. So I think find quite a few jobs that you can apply for, being open-minded, but also take the time to really read the job description, really take the time to see if this is something you would enjoy, and then go to your CV and think, how could I cater the same experience, to sound more lined up with this job description rather than this one, because little things like that will stand out. And I think taking that moment to really look at your CV and say to yourself, how can I make this bit of experience sound more relevant to this job? It's the little things that really make the big difference, because you don't have a lot of space to describe everything. So you've got to use those buzzwords and really use the language that they're using. Look at the ways they're describing things, and how can I link that to my own experience.
Too sure what it is I wanted to do, but one thing I was sure is that I wanted to sort of get more experience. So during my time, the University of Westminster had a collaboration with a university in Ghana called KNUST, and they had sort of students that would come here, and myself and another lady that was sitting opposite the lecture hall also ended up going with me there. And what we did is we worked in the hospital, and then we sort of rotated around the different parts of the hospital. So we volunteered to sort of work in the different parts. So we worked in the hematology department, running sort of full blood count and tests like that, and looking at sort of sickle cell, and just kind of just looking and sort of observing how sort of the hospital works, and just sort of getting that experience there. We kind of worked our way around the whole hospital, and that really kind of gave me sort of the opportunity to kind of figure out what do these people do. That's why I guess I was so strong to say, don't be afraid to just send an email out to try and get some work experience, because that really gave me an insight onto the processes that actually happen. For example, if you're working in a hospital, or maybe in a private lab, which is a little bit different. So it's like the process from a sample coming in, so what happens after the sample comes in, where does it go next, and then maybe the end goal of how that's sort of reported. So really just kind of putting yourself in different environments and trying to visualize what does a working day look like for you. Then that might give you an opportunity to kind of understand why, what it is you're interested in, or whether you like what you like and what you don't like as well about it. I realized I didn't like taking blood because I was terribly afraid of that. But I realized that I did like trying to understand, perhaps the results a little bit more, or how the robots in the lab worked at that point of time. So so definitely connect with sort of the student union and take advantage of the sort of the resources available. I think that links again to sort of paying attention to the sort of lab practices you carry out, and the reasoning behind them, and then using those principles to sort of support your your application. So for example, you may have like different mini projects that you have, and just being able to sort of describe them in your CV, I guess that's really useful. And I actually remember there was a sort of a CV building a part of the university. They helped you to kind of write your CV in sort of a good way. I remember them looking at mine thinking, this looks very crazy, because I had so many ideas and I didn't really know how to sort of put them on paper. So I think it's good to kind of get someone to review your CV and kind of give you some feedback on it as well. I think it's good to take on feedback and just kind of take it as an open mind. I think often when people give us feedback, we feel sometimes a little bit defensive in terms of maybe hearing things that aren't always as positive, but it's, I guess, the ability to try and use that in a positive way to kind of build yourself and understand that there's always room for learning.
Yeah, thank you.
I think sort of look at what you've done in your modules as that work experience, whether it's lab techniques or any experiments that you've done. I mean, if you've worked in a group, that's still teamwork, and it's the soft skills as well that they're looking for. So it's how well do you work in a team, can you deliver projects on time? So it's not just the practical skills, it's also the soft skills that you learn during modules as well. And I think you can, if you look for it, you can actually find quite a few little gems, and then take it to somebody who maybe will help you to be able to structure it a little bit better. But I think there's actually a lot that you do in your modules that you think, oh, it's just part of the module, but actually it's quite good skills that you can draw out and put it into your CV.
When I went into UCL, we had two modules that were running in the first semester sort of together, and one of them was very like straight pharmacology, and then there was another one which incorporated elements of biochemistry. It goes without saying that the people that did a biochemistry degree understood that module a lot more than I did, and it didn't really dawn on me as much as it should have done that I obviously understood the pharmacology much more than they did. But I think what I then tended to do was, you know, for a few months there was, oh my god, I don't understand this and I'm going to fail, and like them feelings are real in your head, but really all that's telling you, if you reverse it, is like areas that you need to practice more to become a more rounded person. So I wouldn't necessarily take, this is very general, but any negative feeling that you have, it should be telling you something that you can work on, where, you know, it's more of an alarm rather than a negative feeling, I would say.
So I actually did iGEM at Westminster, which is a synthetic biology sort of project that they do over the summer. And that was a really big turning point for me, because it made me realize that I want to do research. I love coming to the lab and not knowing, you know, your day wasn't planned out by your supervisor. You had to figure things out, and when things went wrong, you had to troubleshoot and, you know, drive this project as a group of students. So that was a really sort of pivotal point for me to kind of make me realize, going, okay, research is for me. I am loving this, enjoying this, and I love the fact that I am troubleshooting, figuring things out, working out the puzzle. So for me, doing iGEM was really big, and then I think as well when it came to applying for my master's, having that extra lab time was really important. That was sort of a big consideration for them as well. It shows that you are proactive, and this is something that you're genuinely really interested in, rather than you just think that it's just the obvious next step that you should be doing, but you're not actually that keen. But yeah, I think doing something like iGEM was really amazing. Yeah, Boston Syndrome, real. Very, very real. I think in academia, there's always going to be a little bit of it because you're going to be mixed with people who've done different maybe degrees to you, have different levels of experience. And I think sort of what they were talking about with masters as well, I think if you went into a masters and you knew everything about it and everything was super easy, then you're kind of wasting your time there. Like, why, if you know everything, why are you there? So things being difficult is good. It pushes you, and it means that you are learning and you're improving constantly. But the trick is, everyone has imposter syndrome. You know, you kind of get into your head of, oh my god, everybody knows everything, everyone's so much smarter than me, and I'm the only idiot here, what am I going to do? But everyone's in the same boat, everybody feels the same way, and I think once you start talking to your colleagues or your classmates, you'll very quickly realize that actually it's a very universal experience, and you know, you kind of filling in each other's gaps essentially. Like, maybe you'll know something they don't know, and having that teamwork and working together is sort of one way to overcome things and get yourself out of that sort of imposter slump.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I'd say don't worry too much about what everybody else is doing. Your biggest competition is a competition that you have with, I guess, with yourself. So use your strengths and sort of weaknesses to combine with other people, to have that sort of teamwork, to share ideas and learn together. So I think it's not always a competition of who's the best at this. It's kind of working together to kind of build on sort of your own skills as well.
Yeah, I agree with it. Don't have much to add, but I think the one key thing for me and my own experience is that not only does everybody have it, it also might not go away. So I remember listening to a podcast only a few months ago talking about, you know, trying to see other people's experiences with imposter syndrome, how it's affected them, and I also know how it's affected me. You might have it and it might go away. That would be very nice, obviously, but yeah, it might be something that you deal with for a long time, and you just have to keep thinking in your head, like, every time you achieve something, add that to like a sort of, you know, a little list in your head maybe, where you say, actually, I've done this, I've done this, I've done this, and I do belong here. And if you're just starting out as well, and you're just talking about getting hired into your first job post-university, they picked you for a reason, right? You're not there by mistake. So they've looked at that CV, and if they've had 200 people apply and you got it, it's not a fluke.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also like looking and realizing how far you've come. Like, you made it all the way here. You know, I remember just applying to sort of Westminster and looking at the different universities, you know, and writing my personal statement, trying to figure out, at that point there, I was trying to figure out what I could put on my application to get into the university. So it's almost like when you finish university, it's almost like you're doing that whole process again, but you have to always remember where you came from, you know, because when I first started, I was working in Sainsbury's, and then I ended up working in the sort of the pharmacy in Sainsbury's, and then all I had was that experience applying to university. So it's almost like, if you look at it in that way, you made it so far to get here. The world is your oyster in terms of where you can go from here.
Nobody expects a master's student to know all techniques and everything. So specific on your projects, you will be taught what protocols, techniques you need to know. You might also be guided to literature to read as well, to explore some of those protocols and different variations in them. I wouldn't worry about it too much. There's going to be either your supervisors that you can ask for advice. There'll usually be PhD students, postdocs as well, that are always really helpful and offer advice as well. You know, you get taught in, especially if you're doing a very sort of project-heavy based masters, you will have a big project at the end where you sort of conduct your own research project, but you will be initially taught all the protocols, and then you go off and carry out those experiments, but you regularly check back in to see how you're progressing, so you're not completely, left to your own devices to, you always get significant amount of support.
I agree. I feel like the university knows that where you've come from,
Yeah.
so they try and bridge the gap as much as possible, so that you are ready, and then you're not thrown completely into the unknown. So they do sort of account for that. So.
What I did do is we had an event where the leader of the course came in to talk about the course that they were offering, and I don't really know how I ended up being in this situation, but I went to see him at UCL and talked to him, and I read a little bit about who he is, what he did, any relevant publications that he'd made in scientific journals, just to sort of feel like I had some groundwork to talk to him about. Right, maybe you might not know who the course leader is, you might not be able to get that interview, but I think it was a good step in terms of, if he then sees that application, he might remember your name, remember what you talked about, and it all about fine margins and getting your foot in the door however you can, I suppose.
Even if you can't get an interview, I emailed the course supervisor and just asked some questions about the course itself and about the structure of the course, how much lab work is there, what kind of lab work. So just show that extra little bit of interest, and it gets your name, into the forefront of their sort of mind. So when they're going through through the list of applicants, they might go, oh, this girl, I remember getting an email from her and asking about the course. So it's kind of doing those extra little bit of steps here and there. Other than that, I think it's really important, especially in your personal statement, to show that passion that you have. I know it can be quite hard because obviously you're just trying to get through your experience and things, but I think, leave your experience to the CV. Your personal statement is really to kind of drive, why are you pursuing this master's? Why is this important to you, and what are you going to do with it? I think, a person reading it, if they see that you're going to use this master's to further develop yourself and, to really have an impact with it, they will be more drawn to picking you out for, I got interviewed for my master's as well, so that got me into an interview, and then, we spoke a lot about why I was pursuing the master's in the first place. I think that was one of the key things that I remember from my interview, is he was very interested to know why. And I think that's a good thing for you to ask yourself, and then when you're answering that on your personal statement, it will be a lot clearer. Ask yourself, why are you pursuing this master's? What does it mean to you? Are you just doing it because you feel like you have to, because it's the next logical step? My one was a bit different. So I spent 6 months at the university and then 6 months at Stevenage at GSK. I think one of the hardest things about doing a master's that is so short is the fact that it's really quick from day one. It's not like, your university year where it's like you start off kind of easy and then you build up the sort of tempo. Masters, it's module after module after module, and it's all in one go and it's quick. Just keep on top of it. Just don't let yourself think like, oh, I'll do this next week. Just keep on top of it. It's only 1 year, make it count. Don't get lazy. It's so easy to get a little bit overwhelmed and think, you know what, I'll get to it over the weekend, or I'll get to it later. By that point, you're going to have something else from a different class, from a different module. It just happens so quickly, you don't even realize it. So really take the time to really engage with it, to really speak to the lecturers, to your supervisors, to go to any careers events, fairs that the university offers, because if you are at a different university, you might have resources that you didn't have at Westminster, but then you only have the 1 year to use it. So it's try and engage as much as you can with everything that's happening around you. It's going to be tough and it's going to be busy, but it'll be worth it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's the organisation skills are, I guess, the most important sort of skills I guess you would need to sort of prepare yourself. But also remember that even when you do graduate from this course, the resources are still going to be available here as well. So when you leave, so it's not like the University of Westminster just leaves you completely. You still have access to your lecturers as well, and don't be afraid to sort of talk to them and sort of engage with them. I'd say a master's, don't rush yourself into one as well. So if you feel like you do need to take the time out to sort of find yourself, or perhaps do some traveling, don't worry too much about being able to do that. Other people I've known have gone straight into work. Other people I've known have done sort of PhDs. So there's not only sort of one option fits all. Masters for me was pretty difficult. It was a little bit hard. It's a little bit challenging. They do kind of they support you, but it is pretty independent. So they kind of do allow you to just kind of be free, and you have to kind of put the energy and the efforts into it. And I guess that's the prime time to sort of meet people and sort of put yourself out there and sort of network with people during that time, because it is so fast.
I think when I heard that question, specifically talking about settling in, I think it's very easy to go with the tendency of that meaning workload. You also might want to settle in terms of people, find some people there. Maybe there's people from your course already that are going. If not, don't hesitate to try and meet new people. It's, potentially, depending on the course that you're doing, you're going to be doing group work with these people. It's good to have a foundational knowledge of who they are. And also, it then also leans into the workload, because maybe somebody has notes from a class that you weren't able to go to, etc. And these are all very specific points. But yeah, I think knowing people at the university, because it's something that I didn't do immediately until I was sort of forced into group work and talking to people, that I would recommend doing as well. I think I would probably put myself in that boat, being a little bit introverted. I think I'm lucky to work in a sort of environment where the majority of people in my career field kind of feel the same way. So networking specifically, it is very important, but I think when you're told of the importance of it, you have a tendency to overthink about it, and ultimately these are still people, and it's very easy to think in the business world of making relationships purely transactional. I think it would be beneficial maybe if you go to relevant conferences as part of your career to try and put yourself out there to speak to as many people as you can. And it doesn't even have to be about work. You can just try and maybe make a friend, request them on LinkedIn, and I think that the biggest part of that is that you never know when that person could potentially become relevant again in your career.
I think networking is sort of really important in science, especially if you're going to conferences. Turns out the science world is pretty small, and you bump into the same people over and over again. But I think, again, I used to think that I used to really overthink networking. Like, it has to be really professional, and it has to be straight to the point, transactional. But at the end of the day, you're just having a conversation with another human being. It can be fun, it can be interesting, and you're just having a nice conversation. So that's really all there is to it, and just getting to know the people that are maybe in your field, around your field, potentially in companies that are similar to yours, research groups similar to yours, and just finding common ground and having a conversation. At the end of the day, it is just people. It's just chatting to people. It's not as serious or as daunting as sometimes we kind of make it up in our heads.
Yeah, I'd say it can make you feel sort of nervous sometimes, and I feel like even now, at times I'm put into sort of unfamiliar sort of situations, and I'm not really too sure how to react. But I would say often people feel the same as you, so just don't be afraid to sort of ask questions and just be yourself, really, during that time. Even if you just attend the event for a sort of short period of time, just try and sort of make use of the moment that you have, and sort of don't be afraid to sort of put yourself out there, really. Often the hardest part is just arriving. After you've arrived, it tends to get a whole lot better.
So if you have any further questions, there's going to be a networking opportunity. We've just been talking about networking, and some refreshments once we're done. Really, I'd just like to thank our panel very, very much for giving up that time and coming out today. So thank you very much.